welcome to the show. I'm very, very much looking forward to our conversation today because I have my friend Adam Horne on the show. We are going to be talking about many things. Transparency will definitely come up. May talk about the future of HR and the role within the organizations. But he is the co-founder of OpenOrg. If you haven't heard of him so far, you certainly will have done by the end of the episode. Adam, welcome on board.
Hi, awesome to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Well, for those HR professionals listening or non-HR professionals listening who haven't been on LinkedIn recently, can you tell us what OpenOrg does and the sort of dent that you're looking to make in the world?
Yeah, of course. OpenOrg's still relatively new name to a lot of people. We only launched last year, so we're coming up to our first birthday actually in August, September time. But set up by myself and my co-founder John in 2023. We've known each other for 12 years. We've talked for 12 years as really good friends about workplace culture, hiring, communication at work, how it's broken, and how one day we'll fix it. We never had the chance to do that, but finally last year the stars aligned and we had a chance to come together and build something, and that something became OpenOrg. OpenOrg, very, very high level, is all about trying to raise the bar on transparency and communication at work. But that's not the outcome we want to achieve with it. Transparency is just that lever that we're helping companies to pull to get to the outcomes they want. Things like higher engagement, higher trust, high performing teams, more aligned teams. Everything that you're aiming for typically as an executive or a leader or a people leader in a company. We believe that transparency is the foundation to help you get there. So we're helping people leaders and companies to better understand how they can handle transparency with care, harness it to be a competitive advantage. And we do that in a couple of ways. We were building a member network ultimately of individual people leaders who are coming together to learn from each other, help each other, support each other, and get support that they need to build more transparent culture, and also work with companies, of course. So we've got company members who come to us to help them accelerate towards a more transparent culture to get to those outcomes quicker that they're looking for.
Fantastic. And why is it that you zeroed in on transparency? Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah, it's super interesting how we got to this. When John and I were ideating about what's broken, why it's broken, how it's broken, we pulled in a few experiences and actually started on a couple of other different avenues before we zoned in on OpenOrg. Firstly, I left my last business at the end of 2022 and wasn't going to set up another company. Actually, I decided I wanted to go and work for someone else, which I know might sound strange to a lot of people, but been a co-founder for like 9 years and decided I'd love to go and learn from someone. So I decided to become a candidate and started applying to roles again. And that actually is where this sort of like candidate experience piece slapped me in the face. Again, you hear a lot about it, but you don't know about it really until you become a candidate. And it was horrendous. Like, you met again with these like vague career sites, job adverts that don't really tell you the information you need, interviews that don't really give you the information you need because the employees themselves don't have access to that information. And this transparency topic sort of came front of mind for me, and started chatting to John again, who's had his own journey with this from an internal culture perspective. And we just got chatting about how we can fix this intersection of like being missold to, whether intentionally or unintentionally, when you join the new business, and getting a very different experience when you join. We felt that there's a lot there around getting companies to be more open, more honest, more authentic about what that experience is going to be. And if you can do that, we believe that you're going to get a much more aligned hiring experience and culture off the back of it. So that effectively is where we came to. We didn't start zoning in immediately on transparency. Actually, we were looking at more like broader culture. And what we realized very quickly was culture is so subjective. One person's view of what's good is another person's view of what's bad. And for us, we didn't want to fall into this bracket of what we saw as some other badges and awards out there sort of doing, of sort of prescribing good culture. For us, it's not about what's good or bad. It's about telling people what your culture is, not labeling it as good or bad, and letting them decide whether they're going to thrive there or not. So for us, that's where the how open are you narrative came in versus the how good or bad are you, because for me, you don't get good or bad culture.
That's really interesting. I mean, and that way people can self-select in, right? I was having a conversation on a different episode with a guy called Peter Phelan, who calls himself the Culture Doctor, um, in as humble a way as as you can. But he said exactly that point, which is, there are companies that have a culture that you or I would hate to work in, sort of boiler room culture, but there are people that absolutely love that environment, and for them, being in a room full of alphas, duking it out on the phones, seeing who's top biller, making loads of money. That's their idea of a fantastic workplace. And who are we to say that's not a positive a positive culture? But I do get this your point that by being honest about it, by being transparent, you there's only positives there. Well,
Yeah,
maybe not only, but broadly speaking, positives.
yeah, definitely. There's definitely pitfalls with this. I see companies maybe going too far with transparency because they get excited or they believe it. They see some benefits, so they really double down on it. And like we're quite big on saying that you need to make it achievable, embeddable. You need to make sure CEOs, leaders can live and breathe it and role model it, because as soon as they don't, it all falls apart. So there's some pitfalls around it from that point of view. But generally speaking, I don't think that you can have too much transparency as long as you can handle that as a business, and continue to live and breathe it. But you're right. I've referenced the boiler room thing before. It's not my personal, preference, but there are people out there who do really well in those environments. And, who are we to say that that's a bad culture?
So I was expecting you to talk about trust in your answer. No, I'm not criticizing your answer. I was just saying, for me, when I think about why we spend so much time trying to be a transparent business at Instant Impact, and we are a an open org member. I'm very pleased that we are.
Yeah,
I think one of the things that the reason why we're investing in transparency is there's this shocking level, I think quite shocking level of mistrust in our society. Record levels of mistrust between employees and employers, record levels of mistrust of politicians. And I can only see that going one way with deepfakes, with, just taking fake news to a whole nother level, misinformation being spread. I think that human trust is just being really eroded. I'd just love to get your perspective on that, Adam.
Yeah, it's scary times, isn't it? Seeing some of the sort of videos that you see on Twitter of like deepfakes and, people. Yeah, it's scary. You can't sort of tell the difference sometimes. As much as people are having fun with it at the moment, it's quite worrying when you sit down and think about it. But trust is a huge part of what we talk about at Open Org. It's more so an outcome rather than something that you can use as a lever. So again, transparency is what we zone in on, focus in on to help achieve those outcomes, those goals, and they're slightly different for different businesses. But ask most CEOs, leaders, execs, what trust means to them. It's vital to their business, but they also don't necessarily know how to get there. There's a great PwC study that came out recently. There was some really scary facts in there. It was like 67% of employees don't trust their employer. That's huge. That's a big majority. And the even more worrying one for me was 44% of C-suite don't trust their peers on C-suite.
Wow.
When you've got like a boardroom or an exec team that don't even trust each other to do their jobs, that's really, really worrying. And we talk a lot about how dysfunctional leadership teams can be. Some great books out there and studies and whatnot. But getting a well-aligned, well-oiled exec team that trusts each other is vital. And again, so much of the work that we do with Open Org, often, and it's very bespoke company to company, depending on what they need, but often it will zone in on how do we communicate? How do we handle conflict, feedback? How do we break down silos so that we start trusting each other more? So trust is a huge part of one of the outcomes that we hope to achieve for companies that become open orgs. And there's a big part of, people have talked about it for years, the way that you get teams performing is building high trust environments. So that's got to be like a goal for most companies, you'd think.
I can't believe I didn't start with this question, but it occurred to me as you were talking that I maybe should have started with what do you mean when you say transparency? What does it encompass?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, people always ask me about how we define it, and we don't. Like, there's a really big part of transparency. Is it whenever I do like a speaking session or whatever I might do, I tend to get the group to jump into chat or put their hand up and sort of tell me what transparency means to them. And you'll get 10 different answers. Some people will be more about, I want to see more about my pay decisions and how they're made. Others want to see more about funding and finances, and other people just want clarity on decision making. Transparency means very different things to different individuals. So the one big problem that we've got in recent years is in the last 5 years or so, probably testament to the climate out there, I suppose, but more and more companies are using things like trust and transparency in their company values, but they're not going any deeper than that. They'll put "we're transparent" on a careers page. What does it mean? What does that actually mean day to day in your business? So we don't define it because it is different for everyone, but we do work with companies to help them define it, help them understand and build out like a transparency charter, we call it. So they'll as a leadership team actually sit down and say, what do we share? What do we not share? Why? Are there reasons for why we don't share certain things that we can communicate with people? So really building these expectations around what transparency means here in our business so that employees understand, they're aligned, they get it, and also future employees have an opportunity to see what that word means in your company as well. So it's possibly a politician's answer for me.
No, you're all good. I think maybe if I could zero in a little bit. You mentioned a few different parts to it. You mentioned pay. You mentioned decision making.
Yeah.
What are the? Do you have it? Not a definition, but maybe some like columns that people should be thinking about.
Yeah, we've got a resource that underpins a lot of what we do at OpenOrg, and it was like critical to our journey with building OpenOrg out when we were trying to make transparency tangible. We were talking about it with people leaders. We spoke to 100, if not more, people leaders in like Series A to like Series D type businesses. Why aren't you being more transparent with how you build culture? What's holding you back, basically? And the majority of them, aside from a few other issues of like being stretched and under-resourced and not having people to bounce ideas off of, the big theme that came out was transparency doesn't feel tangible. I don't have a blueprint. I don't have a roadmap. How can I do it? So that was our big task with OpenOrg, was we need to give people leaders and companies a framework that they can follow. A bit like B Corp a little bit, if anyone's familiar with that. There's a framework and a blueprint that you can take and follow to get to your goal. So we've broken that down on what we call the Open Culture Framework, and you can get access to this. So it's free and open source on our website. But there's 35 areas on there, 35 tangible things like you can look at to build trust with employees and candidates. And that's broken down into like 6 columns. So we've got things like culture, compensation, career development, diversity, hiring, flexibility. So under these pillars, there's lots of different ways that you can be clearer and more transparent with people to give them an idea as to how we work and why and what we do.
So, Adam, there's a trend that I'm seeing, and I think it's pretty widely reported, which is, I guess, this shift towards a more liquid, more fluid workforce, where people might work with you for a project or for a year or for whatever. It's more work based than job based. I want how does transparency help with that? Because for me, if you've got like a more transient workforce, that risk of trusting someone increases because you're trusting way more people way more of the time. How do you square the circle on that one? What are you expecting to happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing I'd like to see happen if companies go down that route is maybe a shift away from selling culture as like, everyone rolls their eyes at this, don't they? But like the whole like, we're a family. We do this, we do that, and culture will change a little bit from that narrative if you're not necessarily here for the long haul. If it's a little bit more like, we're building this thing, we need people to come and help us do that, and it's going to be shorter term. Doesn't mean you can't work well together, thrive, have fun, all the other stuff. But there needs to be a little bit less focus on come and join us and you'll have a career with us and do this. There's got to be a little bit more give and get. Like, we need this from you, but we will give you this back. And there needs to be that honesty there, because actually what companies don't do very well at the moment is talk about what you need to give us. There's a big focus on EVP and this is what you're going to get and how amazing we are and we can give you all of these things. But they don't talk about the trade-offs. They don't talk about, like, this is what you're going to have to give us in return. And it's okay to talk about that stuff. It doesn't have to be negative. There is trade-offs in any company, no matter how good that company is. And so I'd like to see a little bit more balance there. If you're going to move towards that direction of like shorter termism, that's probably not even a word, thinking on like that, I think it becomes more of a transactional relationship. It requires more honesty up front.
But what's interesting is I feel like a lot of the EVP stuff that you're talking about, you're here for a career, a lot of the construct of job and employment is a bit of a lie at the moment, right? You look at average tenure in a sales exec role in the UK, for example, it's 1.3, 1.4 years. Companies are saying, "Oh, join us, you'll be here forever," and employers are saying, "Yeah, I can't wait. Let me tell you about my 5-year goals." It's already built on a lie, and kind of everyone does the dance, right? Everyone knows that. Yeah, I hire someone. I hope that they'll be with us for the long term. I hope that we're the right business for them for the long term. I hope that they're the right team member for us for the long term. I don't know it. And I think that there's a bit more honesty around that conversation would be really beneficial for everyone.
And yeah, you're right. And it feels like we're heading even more so in that direction. Again, maybe it's a stereotype, who knows? But we talk about like Gen Z coming into like the workforce. They're less interested in like 25-year careers with IBM or whatever that might be. It's more like they're more likely to have shorter tenures and move around and crave that growth. And what I see at the moment in the startup world still is a lot of people leaders struggling to work out how they build career development frameworks. There's still this pressure of like, we need to create these levels and how do we define this and that. And I'm not saying that they're not needed. They are still, and there's still this requirement to give people an idea as to what growth looks like in your business, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I've had a chat with someone the other day who was really struggling to design this framework because they didn't have the sort of business that offered progression and promotion. They just didn't have big enough teams to offer these different levels. So I said, you can't have one, and that's okay. But people aren't necessarily looking for this upwards trajectory up a ladder now. You can offer them career growth in so many different ways whilst they are with you. There's talk about the L&D budget they get, talk about how you can challenge them and put other things on their plate, and maybe even moving them around internally in your business. Like, there's such a different way that you can think about it. So the traditional construct of career development frameworks, relevant to big corporates still, and still relevant to smaller startups, but I think it's changing.
But it's interesting that the sort of constant need to provide framework. Hey, I've been as guilty of this as everyone else, right? Hiring people into a 4-person team and providing them with like a 15-year career development pathway. It's just bullshit. And I mean, the interesting thing, and Adam, you and I, we've both got young kids, right? And I'm sure that some of your friends have gone through the same journey that some of my friends have been through, which is you have kids, your life priorities shift, and you go from must have amazing career, must do incredibly well, to must get promoted every other year or every year or whatever that feels like, to actually, you know what, I quite like to work 3 days a week and do a job that I find easy.
Yeah.
And my priority is spending time with my kids, or my priority is feeling proud at work doing the job that I'm doing and knowing that I'm adding value to a team. And I feel I had Hung Lee on the show, who's a very well known in the recruitment space, and he said something so really interesting. He was saying the way that we build careers is around a 25-year-old blokes, right? That's the whole construct. You assume that everyone's got only career on their mind. You assume that they can work 9 till 6, or in some cases 7 till 10, or whatever it is. Like you assume that there's boundless energy. You want them to interview well. You want them to be a good fit. You want them to have recently played sports. All of that stuff that we're slowly breaking down. But where it hasn't been broken down yet is in the conceptualization of what a job looks like. It's still 37.5 or 40 hours a week, and some people just don't want to do that at different phases in their life.
There's definitely there's been the shift, and that's been accelerated again with COVID, and remote working has helped to accelerate that shift as well. People have finally been forced into realizing what they can have. And I was that guy as a graduate. Like I loved that life, by the way. Like a graduate, I moved to London, commuted in every day. Like in recruitment as well, I was at my desk by like 7 a.m, stayed there till like 8 p.m, like worked really long. I loved it. Like I wouldn't change it for the world. And I loved the progression and the carrot that was there. So like, I think it does suit some people, and there is still that desire, that need, that competitiveness from younger generations coming in now that want promotion. I'm sure you've seen it yourself as well. It's a big headache for leaders of businesses right now. Like people are knocking on the door more and more for that next step. So if anything, that need to progress up the ladder in some way or have some healthy growth is accelerating even more. But people want the balance, and they still want that opportunity to find that different way of working. It doesn't make them any less effective at what they do, though. So again, I mean, talk about different ways of work and maybe moving to a place where people are working in different ways. That's where the whole like job sharing piece fits in as well, which is quite interesting. Like it might be that at some point there's two people doing one person's job, and I've seen that in a few companies along the way, which is quite cool too.
That is really cool. So I'd love to pull us back to transparency. Could you paint a picture? I know you don't have like a one size fits all, and I think that's really good. But can you just maybe share some stories of businesses that you've been really impressed with that are approaching transparency in a really thought provoking way?
People must get fed up with me referencing this one. Like my all time favorite. I shouldn't have favorites, but I do. My all time favorite is currently is a company called Post Hog. Small business, but they've just got the most authentic, real handbook ever. They used to have their product roadmap like open sourced on there, which is even better. I think it's gone now. But they couldn't care less if their competitors saw it, and which I loved. Is like they have so much belief in what they're doing that they look around them. They're just like, you can steal it if you want, but we're going to do a better job, and that's like, we're happy to open source this. But open source is all about their product, their values. It's ingrained. But there's some things and there's some pages in the handbook which I really love. And touching on some of the topics we've talked about, for example, they have a career progression page there, and it's like one page, and it talks about the fact that you want to get a fancy title here. They couldn't care less about fancy titles. What you're going to get if you come and join us is helping us towards IPO. And if you help us towards IPO, they say this, you will get a job in any company anywhere in the world. Like that's what we're going to give you. So like they're stripping this idea back of traditional career progression, and they're almost saying to people, if you care about job titles and progression and little rungs on the ladder, we're not the right place for you. If you care about taking a business through IPO and building something like amazing. They also are one of the only companies, for example, that talk about how they define managers in a business, which is a really strange thing. Like management is something that every company struggles with. Bad managers are everywhere, and it's not their fault. They don't get supported. They don't get developed. They don't know what their role is often. It's companies.
They also just assume they have to be managers to progress, right?
Like companies, and I'm not blaming companies here, but there's this sort of unknown of like, how do we fix it? And companies end up throwing all this money at management training without fixing the problem. Actually, I believe, it's not just me, but like, I believe that a big part of the problem is companies don't sit down and say, what is a manager here? Manager isn't the same thing in every company out there, and it means different things in different places. Again, like transparency. So take the time to define what is a manager here, what's our philosophy to teams. And again, Post Hog talk about this on their handbook. They talk about how they have small teams, and that's intentionally very small and lean because they want managers to be still very hands-on, from like an individual contributor perspective, and that's how they work. So they're one of the only companies that take time to actually talk about that, and that's crucial for someone to know coming into a business. Finally, just on them as an example, and I spoke to a previous employee who which I loved hearing this. One of their values is everyone codes. They use Gitbook or GitHub for a lot of their work, and every single person in the business, regardless of role, has to have some basic ability to use it, which requires some basic level of coding. So if you can't do it, that's okay. You need to learn. If you don't commit to learning, you're not going to thrive here. And this person said it was the best couple of years they had. They absolutely loved this business, and the coding piece was a real learning curve that they struggled to deal with, but they got there. And actually, once they got there, it was great. So again, this sort of like transparency around culture and what you need to give us to thrive, I love. So they're like, if people want to go and dig around Post Hog's handbook, go and find it. You will find it. That's one, and there's a heap of others, but I'll ramble on forever if I
feel like that's been very effectively plugged for Post Hog. Guys, if you're a coder and you want to go work for Post Hog, that sounds awesome. Adam, I think we're running out of time. Let me ask one final question. That was dramatic, wasn't it? Yeah, like little pregnant pause. If someone's starting out on their transparency journey right now and they are in a mire of secrecy and no one knows what salary everyone's on different salaries at the same level, and no one knows how decisions are made, etc., 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 how do they start?
Yeah, good question. We've got a little bit of an infographic type blueprint that we talk to people about, that we have some steps that we try and follow if we work with companies. And again, you'll start in different places there, but generally speaking, again, it comes back to what we touched on earlier. For me, it's about sitting down and defining what transparency is going to be and mean in your business. Do it as an exec team, create a transparency charter or whatever you want to call it, but effectively, what do we communicate, why, how do we do it, when, all of that good stuff. Once you've understood that, you can build from there. You start designing your business around that. What are we going to use to document? Is it Notion? Is it SharePoint? Is it XYZ? Whatever you use, what tools do we use to communicate? Is it Teams or Slack or whatever? Designing it around that charter is really, really key. Then embedding it in the business internally is really, really vital. That you can't start going public with sharing things if you haven't got your house in order first. So talking a lot about embedding that culture and ways of work and getting teams to co-create along the way is really, really healthy. And then being able to then flick that switch on eventually. Once you've documented, once you've built a handbook, once you've got all of these things in place and they're being lived and breathed comfortably, then you can start being more open and transparent with things. But along the way, you'll have key projects like career development, pay transparency, and compensation, and clarity over flexible working, and all of that stuff that you will work on as a team and hopefully co-create as much as possible along the way as well.
Fantastic, Adam. Great advice. Thanks for coming on. I learned a huge amount. I'm sure my listeners have as well. Team, if you do want to find out any more, go to, do people say www anymore? I'm going to say it. www.openorg.fyi. They've got loads of free resources and it's really cool. Adam, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Felix.